Hello, everyone, to the November presentation of the Friends of History First Wednesday Lecture Series. I'm Ben Woodbury with the Friends and will be your host today. As always, let me start with a few administrative details before today's presentation. As a reminder, all recent, past, and future First Wednesday online lectures are now available on our Friends of History webpage. Just click on the lecture series link at the top of the homepage. Our monthly lectures are being provided free of charge by the Friends of History with support from the New Mexico History Museum. We do, however, accept and encourage donations. These funds will directly go to support the lecture series and, more importantly, all History Museum programs and exhibits. Should you wish to make a donation, just go to our website and click on the Donate button at the top of the page. We're looking forward to our December presentation, when our speakers will be William DeBuys, the noted conservationist and author, and Don Usner, the highly regarded photographer and writer. On December 1st, the topic to be discussed will be the Valles Caldera, then, now, and to come. Our speakers will be presenting a photo talk on the Valles Caldera National Preserve, based upon their just published book, which highlights the main events, political and ecological, of the first 20 years of the preserve and its prospect for the next 20. Don Usner will show some of the photographs he captured for this revised and expanded edition of the book, which first appeared in 2006. His photographs will include a selection documenting the effects of the Las Vegas, Conchas, and Thompson Ridge fires. If you wish to learn more about this lecture and all upcoming lectures, just sign up to be on our mailing list via our webpage or by email at the address cited below. We're also happy to highlight for you today two upcoming events co-sponsored by the New Mexico History Museum. On the weekend of 12-15 November, the annual Harvey Weekend program will return both online and in person. Once again, there will be lectures on the Fred Harvey phenomenon, as well as the annual Saturday night banquet, combined with an auction of Fred Harvey memorabilia. And of course, there will be activities in Las Vegas, New Mexico as well later in the weekend. As already mentioned, most activities will be combined online and in-person events. In addition, on this coming Sunday, 7 November, the History Museum will show the Harvey Girls movie and host a great talk about movies made in New Mexico with film historian Jeff Berg, all of which starts at 1 p.m. in the museum. Look for updates on the History Museum Facebook page. For more information on all Fred Harvey weekend events and to register for the talks and dinner tickets, check out the website provided below. All proceeds from the Fred Harvey weekend, lectures, and activities will go to benefit the New Mexico History Museum. On the same long weekend, the 200th anniversary of the Santa Fe Trail will be celebrated with events in Las Vegas, along the route of the Santa Fe Trail between Las Vegas and Santa Fe, and in Santa Fe itself. The latter include events at both the History Museum and the Museum of Art, as well as reenactments of the arrival of William Becknell in Santa Fe, and the dedication of the end of trail BAR marker on the plaza. For all the details of this celebration and to make reservations for selected events, go to the website provided below. Today's discussion on the multicultural impacts of the Santa Fe Trail also complements these Santa Fe Trail anniversary celebrations. As for today's lecture, our speaker, Thomas E. Chavez, has a PhD in history from the University of New Mexico. He directed the Palace of Governors State History Museum for 21 years. Under his administration, the Fray Angelico Chavez Library was opened, and the planning and money was achieved for the new History Museum and the Stuart Udall Resource Center. He has published 12 books, 3 of which are published in translation in Spain. His book, Chasing History, Quixotic Quests of Artifacts, Art, and Heritage, is a first-hand account, mostly about History Museum collecting. Tom is a corresponding member of Spain's Royal Academy of History and a research associate for the Latin American Iberian Institute of the University of New Mexico. Today, Tom will speak on the multicultural influence of the Santa Fe Trail. The trail can be of interest on many levels, from tracing its ruts, reading the journals of those who traversed it, compiling receipts of the food they ate, focusing on biographies of individual travelers, and more. Yet the trail's history has a context that begins before and has continued after its existence. Its importance relative to the European Reformation and the history of the United States resonates today. It is this context that makes the Santa Fe Trail a significant event in North American history. Following the presentation, Tom will answer any questions you may have. As always, your questions and comments can be posted at any time in the YouTube chat room, both during and after the presentation. Upon completion of today's event, the entire presentation will be posted on the Friends of History webpage, as well as on the History Museum's YouTube and Facebook pages. So now, let us welcome Tom Chavez.
Well, thank you, Ben, for that great introduction. I love introductions, and yours is one of the better. So thank you for that. And thanks for inviting me to participate in this series, and especially to talk about the Santa Fe Trail on its anniversary that's coming up. Back in the day, I did a reenactment as Facundo Malgares and met with Jeff Hingensbaugh, who's actually a descendant of Becknell. And we played out the role of Becknell coming down the Santa Fe Trail in 1821 and supposedly opening the trail. And this is near and dear to my heart. And of course, I did a biography of a guy who traveled the trail a lot, Manuel Alvarez. And that's what really got me interested in the trail in the first place. I always look at history. I step away from the tree and look at the forest, I guess, and look at the bigger picture. And the Santa Fe Trail to me is a really poignant point why we should look at the bigger picture. I mean, basically, we look at the trail and say it opened in 1821 when Becknell came with 5 of his companions and met a Mexican contingent outside of Las Vegas led by a guy named Gallego. And so the trail opened in 1821 and closed with a railroad essentially in 1879 or so. And I see a bigger picture. First of all, we need to know that the trail would not have existed had there not been a Chihuahua or Camino Real. Camino Real was the trail that went to Mexico. The Chihuahua Trail is the same trail, developed its new name after Mexican independence because when they won their independence from Spain, nothing was going to be royal anymore, so it's the Chihuahua Trail. The whole point of the Santa Fe Trail was to connect with the Chihuahua Trail to do trade with Mexico. New Mexico was kind of the middleman of all of this trade. And some New Mexicans benefited from it. By the end of the trail, or let's say by the end of the Mexican period, when the United States took over the territory, over half the trade was owned and operated by Mexicans, former Mexican citizens, and some of whom had bank accounts in the East Coast, including Manuel Armijo, 3-time governor of New Mexico. He had a bank account there. Manuel Alvarez, who I did a biography, not only had accounts in New York, but in London to purchase and buy things and transship back to get onto the trail and make some money. So the trail was then and has always been something bigger than just Missouri to New Mexico. And sometimes we spend a lot of time looking at the ruts and trying to figure out where the trail went. And and read some of the biographies of some of the people, and get pensive about, wow, how did they suffer on the trail, and what did they eat, and what was the campsite like, and could we ride the trail today? Just kind of a romantic view of things. Although if you try riding it, it's not so romantic. And I see a bigger picture, and the bigger picture to me is the meeting of cultures. The meeting of cultures, meaning that the descendants of Northern Europe, basically England, who were Protestant, who created the 13 colonies, and we know that history, created colonies who rebelled, and from there developed into a transcontinental world power. Well, in doing that, they expanded east to west. And out west, of course, is New Mexico, from their point of view. And then there was the other culture who were primarily Catholic and Spanish, Spain leading the way, who came to Mexico and expanded from south to north, and went through the same kind of trials and tribulations as the east to west expansion. They met new people, and saw new country, developed an accent all of their own. I love to say that we Americans like to say the English have an English accent, when actually we're the ones with the accent. Same with the Spanish. We New Mexicans who speak Spanish like to say that the Spanish speak with an accent. So wherever you go, the thing is that we changed when we came here. We became American, all of us, through the experience of being in this continent and surviving, and through generations. We became different. And in the expansion from south to north and east to west, of course, they were going to meet again if they're on the same continent, and they were. And the hub of that meeting is New Mexico. It was, and it is New Mexico, still is, given all the border information and news we get today. And so the Santa Fe Trail then plays an integral role in all of that. And so let's do a little history now with the trail. The first use of wagons that went over what became the Santa Fe Trail took place in 1601. And that's when Juan de Oñate, our infamous first governor, went out on an expedition. He went out on the Canadian River into where Ute Lake is today in eastern New Mexico, and then on into the Texas Panhandle, and then north through Oklahoma up into Kansas onto the Arkansas River, and then turned around and came back what would become the Santa Fe Trail. And he was following guides, native guides who brought him back and escorted him back. And so he had wagons, and those wagons were the first wagons that created the first ruts, which would become the Santa Fe Trail over a century later. So everything from that moment on, everything onto the plains, every landmark on the plains had a Spanish name. The New Mexicans had been out in the plains before the 1821 so-called opening of the trail. They'd been trading on the plains. There was a Pueblo settlement on the plains, Cuartelejo, that took place roughly around the Pueblo Rebellion of 1680, when some of the Pueblo Indians, rather than wait for the Spanish to return, decided to go out and basically place themselves in servitude to the nomadic Indians in that area, which is today the Kansas-Colorado border, and formed some pueblos there. And when the Spanish came back, of course, they started trading with Cuartelejo as well, became a stopping point in some of their expeditions, most notably the Segasur expedition that resulted in the Segasur paintings, or one of the Segasur paintings. So before the trail even so-called opened, officially opened, New Mexicans knew the plains. They were familiar with the landmarks. They knew the routes. There's a great story of one New Mexican who actually crossed the plains to St. Louis looking for his mother, who had been captured in a Comanche raid in San Fernando de Taos. And it turned out that this elderly lady, who had a kind of a legendary reputation for her age, was his mother. She had been traded through various tribes, and then married a French trader who took her to St. Louis, where she ended up inheriting his property when he left her to go back to France. And this New Mexican went and crossed the plains this is what I got to do. And so it's important to note that the trail there was no barrier between the peoples moving east to west and north to south. That people were going back and forth, and that includes some United Statens, some American traders who came into New Mexico and traded and left, kind of, they're unheralded types. But the big point of 1821, though, the reason we call it the opening is up until 1821, New Mexico belonged to Spain. And Spain, like England, when it had its colonies, was a practice mercantilism. That is, that the colonies essentially existed for the mother country, and so they prohibited trade with other countries or other colonies. And so any trade that did occur, and any of these Americans who did show up before the trail had to do it and be kept secret. Sometimes they were arrested and then released after they traded, and then it went on. In 1821, just before Becknell arrived, word came to New Mexico that independence from Spain, Mexico's independence from Spain had been achieved. And so now the borders were open. Mexico could trade. And a natural trading partner was the other new country on the continent, the United States of America. We tend to telescope time sometimes and forget that Mexico in 1821, the United States won its independence in 1783 at the end of the war. Officially, it became a country. And so we're within, 40 years of United States independence. And I'm going to guess that most of the people that are listening to me right now or watching me right now, like myself, 40 years is nothing, man. We can all remember 40 years ago, you think about it. And so some of us, have children older than 40 years old. So like myself, so it's not that long ago. So the United States was a new country. Mexico, won its independence, opened up its borders and wanted to trade right away with everybody because, it was like, euphoria. Now we can do it. They couldn't do it before, and now we can. And of course, over relatively flat land where everybody knew you could take wagons, the expansion of the United States had crossed the Mississippi River, was now into Missouri. And here was New Mexico, and the main part of Mexico itself had been expanded all the way up to Chihuahua. And so, and there were trails coming to New Mexico. And so here's a perfect opportunity for the two new countries to trade. Becknell is interesting because he left with his 5 companions packed with stuff to trade, and they were going to do it secretly and maybe get arrested and run that risk and then get released and everything. And they were met by this contingent that was going out to chase Comanche Indians that had just raided one of the colonies here, one of the settlements here. And they thought, okay, now we're going to be arrested. But no, there was a complete different welcoming. They were taken to Santa Fe, where the governor, Facundo Magares, met them and welcomed them and, treated them and everything. And they couldn't believe it. They traded and went back to St. Louis with great profits and word that the borders were open, and the Santa Fe Trail then became the history that we tend to think of with the trail. Now, Santa Fe Trail was never a trail of migrants, of people moving, their whole families and stuff. It was a commercial trail, as was the Chihuahua Trail, a commercial trail. So basically goods came into New Mexico, were transported down the Chihuahua Trail into Mexico. Mexico in exchange had a lot of silver from its silver mines and mules, which became the Missouri Mules, incidentally. And so, Mexico had the stuff that the young United States was in dire need of: hard specie, silver to back their printed money, and some gold. And so it is interesting that some of the merchants that I've studied, like Alvarez and Armijo, Armijo never went on the trail himself, but he contracted people to do it for him. And I can speak for Alvarez. He always tended to go to the mints and cash in on hard specie. He would take bags of silver and gold and cash it in at the mints there, and then use that money to buy goods to bring back to New Mexico. And he wasn't the only person doing that. So this went on. what does that mean though? The two people that expanded, the people from the south to the north and the east to the west, were these natural rivals. And they carried in their cultural baggage, some of which exists in us today. These biases about those Spanish Catholics, and biases about those heretics who left the Catholic religion to become Protestants. That the cultural baggage of Europe, of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, and not ironically, the leading countries of the Reformation was England, and the Counter-Reformation was Spain. And so the propaganda machines of both sides picked up and resulted in a number of wars over centuries. And so the people from those two nations carried that in their cultural baggage and then their attitudes towards each other. And so here we have now the trails opening up and these merchants coming in. Now merchants tend to break through all the biases and prejudices if they're making money. I mean, they have a priority. But still, the trails became like blood veins in a way, where the cultural lifeblood of these two peoples, these two natural rivals from Europe from centuries past, came through and met again here in New Mexico. And I find it really interesting that this meeting was not exactly a peaceful meeting. I mean, think about it. New Mexico was a part of Spain, and then Mexico still today, much longer than it has been part of the United States. And so in that context, these two trails became as they say in Spanish, the choque, the accident, the hitting, the meeting, which was not necessarily a peaceful one. And it resulted, of course, in the Mexican War. The Santa Fe Trail didn't cause it, but the Mexican War became the I guess you want to call the shotgun wedding between the two cultures here in New Mexico. The result of that was that New Mexico became part of the United States. The trail still was open because there was no other service to get in here, and the trade still continued even after the Mexican War to an extent. And so this meeting, it becomes the apex of these two cultures who have to learn to live together, and that makes the trail very important. So I use the euphemism that Paco meets Horatio Alger. These are the attitudes of the people that I'm talking about. Horatio Alger, of course, became the standard, the Horatio Alger books. Horatio Alger was actually the author of books where he proposed, I guess, or wrote about, a child who through keeping his nose clean and working hard and a little bit of luck will succeed. God will reward you for your effort if you make a strong effort. And Horatio Alger really was extension of the Puritan ethic of working hard, and if you work hard you will succeed. And of course your morality then becomes measured by your success. And in Mexico, I use Paco as the euphemism, but if you're intellectually inclined, you could say Francisco Clavijero, for example, and Neolasticism. That's N-E-O with an Aztec-ism. Neolasticism that came out of Mexico and still does today. And basically what Neolasticism was is written by the Jesuit priest Francisco Clavijero. After his expulsion from Mexico, because he was a Jesuit, he wrote about Mexico and what it was. And what he said was, the Europeans look down on us because we're American, but in America, we have not only the history and the heritage of Europe, but we have the history and heritage of the New World. And in his case, he was talking about the Mayans and the Olmecs and the Toltecs and the Aztecs and all the native peoples and history that was there, and that we've become something different. And that difference is that we in Mexico, the idea of family became very important, and extended family, and that's true in New Mexico. I mean, everybody that has my last name is a primo, for example. You know, whether they're not are or not, they're a primo, which is good, I guess, because then you know, it limits marriage possibilities. So I got to tell you, I have a lot of good-looking cousins. So you know, it's a different kind of attitude about things that comes down the trails, as well as in the meeting of these things. And so we have all these people who come from the United States, and all these people from Mexico and New Mexico who go to the United States, and they're learning about each other. And it becomes kind of a dichotomy, because some of the, you know, you read some of the journals of the people came, like Josiah Gregg. He had certain biases. He carried his cultural baggage, and he saw certain biases. On the other hand, if you read, you know, Alvarez's letters and journals, he had his biases too, and they both react to what they find in New Mexico, which was a little different from where either one of them came. Alvarez came from Spain. Josiah Gregg came from the United States. In New Mexico, because we were an island in the wilderness, we were always beyond the frontier lines. Some would argue we still are. We in New Mexico became a little bit different than even the mother countries that we were born from. And so those reactions of people who come here from other places become very interesting. I say all this, and I'm giving you this bigger picture rather than giving you details of, you know, for example, the Bent brothers and Saran St. Vrain and Bent's Fort and all of that. You know, and Tecate and the different, you know, sites on rabbit ears and the cutoff, and that Jedediah Smith was killed by Comanche Indians on the trail. I'm passing up all that kind of detail to give you a kind of a bigger context, so that when you read and learn and hear about, or even listen to lectures about the trail, or go on the Santa Fe Trail Association and go have meetings on the trail at various places, and then go out on excursions to see the trail, you'll understand that all of this meant something that's much more important and bigger than the actual days of the trail, that it had its influence. And maybe that's one of the questions all historians should ask is, you know, what's so important about this? You know, besides that it's fun, you know, to learn about, but what's important about it? And you think about that for a second, that here in New Mexico, we had the meeting of these two rival cultures, and the trail became the key for that meeting, that brought down, you know, opened the gates for this meeting. And it is a meeting to which we are still trying to adjust today. All you have to do is listen to some of our national rhetoric about things. I always remembered when I first started working at the Palace of the Governors, there were staff at the Palace of the Governors at the time, a staff member, I should say, who, you know, just projected Mexico into Spain, like they're the same people and the same cultures. And I always told people, if you want to tell the difference between a Spaniard and a Mexican, feed them chili. There's no chili in Spain, and it surprises people. It just surprises some people that, oh, you know, Spanish don't eat chili. I thought everyone, all the Spanish eat chili. No, they don't. So we're still learning about each other. We today in our rhetoric still have our biases. Obviously, some of our leaders have biases. Look at some of the laws that are trying to be enacted and so forth. Now, some of that goes back to the merchants just trying to make money or empower themselves. It's not bias at all. They know what they're doing, and they want to, you know, retain themselves in whatever lifestyle they're living in. So the Santa Fe Trail became that kind of thing. It became the meeting of the cultures. It became the story of the Southwest, really, because it expanded into the Southwest as the Southwest continued to become populated. But those biases, even during the time of the Santa Fe Trail, right after the Mexican War, surfaced when the Congress couldn't make New Mexico a state, even though New Mexico was qualified constitutionally to be a state, had a large enough population. It petitioned for statehood, copying Missouri's state constitution. But Congress couldn't do it because the population in New Mexico was majority Catholic and non-English speaking. And then when they made it a territory and we could have local elections, as if the Americans thought that those Mexicans in New Mexico don't know what elections are, when in fact they did elect to have local elections throughout their history, and had call days, and governors were appointed, but they stayed appointed under the United States territorial system. In the first elections, the New Mexicans allowed the Native Americans to vote. And of course, in one of those first elections, the New Mexicans elected one of their own to be its representative in Congress, a non-voting representative, but a representative nonetheless. And this was Jose Manuel Gallegos, the ex-priest, who had run afoul of Archbishop Lamy. And they couldn't have it. The Americans who lost the election, so they challenged it with their friends in Congress. Congress didn't overturn the election, but they eliminated all the Native American votes. Well, under the Mexican and Spanish systems, Native Americans were first subjects of the king, so that's why they still live on land in which they lived on when the contact occurred. And then under Mexican system, all Native Americans were citizens, as they are today, and with full voting rights in Mexico. And so this was one of those adjustments that all of a sudden surfaced right away. Native Americans can't vote. That's that. And so those kinds of things happen. The other kind of adjustment you see right away is the Catholic Church. New Mexico had a bishop from Durango who periodically visited, but the United States after the war decided, wait a minute, we can't have those people answering to the church in Mexico. They're going to answer their own. So they convinced the Catholic Church, that's headquartered at that time in Baltimore, to create the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And in a fit of great intelligence, they found a French missionary in Ohio, thinking that because he's French, he's Latino, and he'll get along with the Spanish Mexicans of New Mexico. And they made him the first Archbishop of New Mexico. And of course, that was Jean-Baptiste Lamy. And of course, he did not get along at all with the local population here, and especially the local priests, which he brought in his cultural baggage from France. And even today, France and Spain are serious rivals. The Americans just didn't understand that dynamic. And so that played out where, actually the territorial legislature petitioned the Pope to have him and his assistant removed, especially his assistant, Jean-Baptiste Machabu, who became the first Archbishop of Denver. So all these things are part of what happened because of the Santa Fe Trail now opening up the gates for these two cultures to get together. And it created this big, very interesting picture that New Mexico is kind of like you can look into the microscope and see the adjustment and problems of these two cultures that have come together. They were married in a shotgun wedding, as I said, along in the third, I want to call it the third culture, but it's also multicultures of the Native American community on whose land this is all played out. And so we have these multicultures living together and trying to, or maybe not, adjust to each other. Whether it's working or not, we are together. And I like to, because we're getting close to the end of here, to say that the Santa Fe Trail created something that's very special in New Mexico. It makes us unique in this country. It brought all these cultures together. And not the three cultures, as like the story told, Angelico Chavez told me this once. of a classroom where the teacher asked her third graders, what are the three cultures in New Mexico? And there was silence. And finally, a young girl lady from the back row raised her hand, and the teacher says, what are the three cultures? And the young lady said, men, women, and children. That's what we're trying to get to, I think. And New Mexico has always tried to do that. It has been a history of inclusivity, but we've had our adjustments, and I've given you some examples of things that and biases that are still with us today. We have, for one reason or other, historical circumstance and geography have this marriage of cultures in which the Santa Fe Trail played a major part in. And as a marriage of cultures, we've become a family. And everybody who's grown up in a family knows, even if you've been married for 40 or 50 years, you have your disagreements, you have your adjustments. And so why wouldn't whole societies that come together won't have their disagreements, their adjustments, their setbacks, but they stay together and they survive. And so we in New Mexico have that message. It might be a little bit Pollyannish to some people who want us to split up and like to denigrate other cultures to support their own, especially given today and what's going on with different things. I won't get into those details, but the big message of New Mexico, whether the detractors like it or not, from all sides, is that we have learned to survive together. All the people who were here are here, and we've become something different even from the other parts of the country in some ways. We've learned to, eat chili for breakfast and not kill the cook, or go to an Indian ceremonial and not kill the dancer. Whereas in parts of the world, that's exactly what's happening. And maybe there are some people in this very state would like to see that happen again, but it's not going to. Our history speaks differently, and the Santa Fe Trail was an important cog in that lesson. So I want to thank all of you for giving me a chance to pontificate to you, I guess, again. I miss the lecture series. I miss all my friends, seeing them in person. And I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.
Tom, I want to thank you very much for this timely discussion on the multicultural impact of the Santa Fe Trail as we look to celebrate its 200th anniversary. I wanted folks to know that Tom is joining us from Malaga, Spain, where he has just begun a multi-year assignment as a researcher with the Latin American Research Institute at the university there. So this is one of our first truly international discussions on the Friends of History, and we much appreciate him providing the time to do this presentation for us. Before we start the Q&A, well, let's just go ahead. Should you have any questions and comments on the lecture, just include them in the chat room provided here on the YouTube page where you're viewing the presentation. As folks begin to consider asking questions, I wanted to offer at least one to start off. Tom, I greatly appreciate your focus on the New Mexico tradition of inclusivity, embodied in much of the historical and present day interaction of the three distinct cultures in this state. I wonder if you might want to elaborate a bit or offer other insights into how this unique experience can assist us today during this period of increased tension between the innumerable cultures which are integral to the U.S. way of life.
Well, can you hear me first of all?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good, good. I'm so far away, I worry that my voice won't carry across the ocean.
Well, we thank technology for this assistance.
To get to your question, the Santa Fe Trail becomes the last piece in the big puzzle, I guess, of what New Mexico's history is about in that picture of the coming together of cultures. Spain was the European country that got to New Mexico first, and Catholicism. And that was the reason for them coming, because the Pueblo Indians were an attraction to the missionaries to convert. They were sedentary. And the point is that those Pueblo Indians weren't eliminated like in other parts of the world in North America where Europeans went, for example, in New England or the East Coast. And so they started borrowing, there was a synthesism that went on between the cultures, and there was adjustments. Excuse me. The Pueblo Revolt's the single most successful Indian rebellion in North American history. And the Spanish came back. It was like throwing a glass of water in their face to get them to understand certain things. And they did. And ever since then, people have lived together. The Native Americans, in this case, the Pueblos, were left on their lands. They were considered subjects of the king and queen. One case in point is the canes that the king sent to be passed out to all the Pueblos that are now, symbols of the governor's office in various Pueblos, something that Abraham Lincoln heard about and copied later. That kind of thing went on. But you see that also in the ceremonials, the Matachinas dances, for example, even the different celebrations, and in religion where the Catholic Church does exist in Pueblos, but so does their native beliefs and religions, and so they become kind of multi-religious in that sense too. So there is all of that. You see that, and one of the things that really interested me when I learned a long time ago is the Saltillo Serape from Mexico, which came to New Mexico, and the designs ended up in part being copied in Navajo blankets. And so that kind of stuff, speaks about people not separating, but being influential on each other. Overlap that then when the United States expanded and started coming here, and that the apex of that, of course, is the opening of the Santa Fe Trail, and then the Mexican War that makes us a part of the United States. That brought back together these ancient European prejudices that people who probably didn't even know where those prejudices came from and how they originated back, centuries before, with the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, and the Catholic Church needs to be reformed, and the people who want to reform the church are heretics. And, there was just no love between the two. They became rivals, national rivals over time, to some extent, right through our own War of Independence. So those attitudes came and met again in New Mexico, overlapped with what had already gone on with the Spanish and all their descendants and subsequent generations with the Native Americans. And so at the end, what you see, make it kind of simple, is all these people who have come together and have learned to at least adjust to each other, if not appreciate each other, which a lot of us do. Most of us eat chili in New Mexico now, and most of us enjoy an Indian ceremonial and like Indian-made pottery. Most of us are curious about the others. We're not going to change the name of Santa Fe overnight, and we're not adverse to San Juan changing its name to Okewinge. That we understand all of that. So we are like, I use the analogy of a married couple, but married couples go through life adjusting to each other as they age and their tastes change. And if you really love each other, if you really appreciate each other, you will survive it all.
Thank you, Tom. It really is a fine compliment. I don't see any other questions at the moment, so I'll ask one more. I was quite struck by your discussion of Manuel Alvarez as a representative of one of the important Hispanic traders on the Santa Fe Trail. And I wondered if you might elaborate a bit on his life in Korea based upon the extensive research you've done and the biography you have written.
Alvarez, he was my PhD dissertation. And the reason he became my dissertation is because I guess I had a seminar dealing with the Santa Fe Trail or something like that. Maybe it was the Mexican period. And his name kept being mentioned by all these journals and stuff. He's in Josiah Gregg, for example. One prime example, but all these other journals, everybody knew the guy. But he was always mentioned in passing as helping somebody or doing something, but he was never controversial. And so I took it as a challenge to try to put his life together. And lo and behold, the State Record Center has all his papers and journals and stuff. And his will is in the Fray Angelico Chavez Library. And so I had a great start. He was a guy, and then he became really interesting to me because he came from Spain. He first went to Mexico, but left it because the rebellion was about to happen there, the independence movement, and came back into Mexico through the north, down the Santa Fe Trail in 1824, 3 years after the opening, the quote opening. And he was a literate man. He could read and write Spanish in the course of his life. Probably came reading and writing French because he could do that too. But he learned to read and write in English too. And so his letters are all of that. And he became kind of like a focal point for me to look at that whole period, because he was neither Mexican nor United Staten. He was a Spaniard who came here and inserted himself in all of this. And he kind of saw both sides of things, which is, he talked about biases of the Americans, but the problems of the Mexicans and kind of thing. And it was really kind of an interesting way to look at that period. I'm still doing research on him. I hope while I'm here in Spain, I can get into the National Library, because I believe I believe he's the effective discoverer of the geysers and boiling pots of Yellowstone Park. And he writes, he went into the mountains in 1828 and stayed there till 1832 and was a mountain man. And he did go up and see Old Faithful and all of that. That's well documented. And he probably as early as 1830, maybe 1831 was when he saw the Old Faithful and all of that stuff. And he came back to Rendezvous and talked about it in such glowing terms that everybody else wanted to go see it. And so it became, something to see. Well, another person writing about his life years later wrote about Alvarez, another person mentioning Alvarez, saying he was an intelligent, astute, well-respected man who wrote articles for a Spanish journal that he received in the mail, from a Madrid journal that he received in the mail. What else would he write about? Could he be the first person that had published a description of what is today Yellowstone Park in Spain? Mm. So yeah, I want to do a search in the National Library here and see if I can find that.
Yeah. Well, look forward to your results. I think it'll be fascinating, no matter what you find.
It'll be an article, but
yes, indeed. Well, look, I want to again thank you very much for taking the time and for sharing us your insights. It's, of course, extremely timely, and wish you well in your time in Spain. Enjoy it, and hopefully you will find it very productive.
Oh, no problem there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, I want to thank you for your participation and attendance in this to this presentation. When you have a moment, do check out the Fred Harvey Weekend online events and the Santa Fe Trail Bicentennial events on their respective web pages or through the History Museum's Facebook page. Also, at the History Museum this coming Sunday, November 7th, there will be a lecture on filmmaking in New Mexico by Jeff Berg, followed by a showing of the film The Harvey Girls, of course, starring Judy Garland. So check that out as well if you're interested. Finally, to see other talks in the Friends of History First Wednesday lecture series, to learn more about the Friends of History, or to make a donation, check out our webpage at friendsofhistorynm.org. And for now, see you in December to hear Don Usner and William DeBuys speak on the Valles Caldera, then